Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Meet Alicia Chin, Director of Sustainability and Social Impact at VF Corporation, who discusses activewear brand and retailers' icebreakers, open admission of falling short in their 100% plastic-free ambition. We delve into the challenges, the progress made, and how their transparency sets a precedent for retail industry-wide sustainability efforts. Hear about Icebreaker's innovative approaches and their pledge to ongoing improvement in this episode that is perfect for the times. Let's listen in now. Alicia, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm good. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me. I'm doing pretty well. It's Friday, so... am I allowed to say it's Friday? Sorry.
No, that's okay. We're talking on a Friday. That's good. Fridays are good. Listen, so I said it's good afternoon. I don't know. Where are you? Is it good afternoon? Where am I reaching you today?
It's actually morning. I'm based in Denver, Colorado.
Nice. Now, tell me about Denver. I see in your LinkedIn, Michigan. I see some university at George Washington University. So, what drew you to that part of the world? It's a great place for anybody who's interested remotely in fitness and the outdoors. Maybe that's where it aligns.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Michael. I grew up on the East Coast of, the U.S. and lived all over, from D.C. to New York to Philadelphia, did a couple years grad school at Michigan, and then ultimately ended up in Denver for the job with VF Corporation. But being in the outdoors and the mountains definitely was a huge factor in that decision as well.
Fantastic. So VF had a bit of an easier sell on that point, where lifestyle and all that. Fantastic. How long you been there?
I've been with VF for about 4 years. That's when I moved out to Denver. So right when COVID hit, so it was an interesting time to move across the country and start a new job. But it's again, during the pandemic, it's a great place to be with lots of space and open air and the mountains. So it's been a fun 4 years.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, we kind of jumped right in. Let's talk about you a bit more. Tell us about your background, how you got to where you are from a professional perspective. You did an MBA at Michigan, I saw. So you've got that in the kit box. But and how did you get there, and what do you do for a living?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently the Director of Sustainability and Social Impact at VF Corporation. We own brands like North Face, Vans, Timberland, but I specifically lead sustainability and social impact for our emerging brands. So that includes Icebreaker, Smartwool, and Altra. My career really, coming out of college, I knew that I wanted to focus on having my career be around solving climate change. And there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. But at that time, the private sector was really starting to do a lot. Walmart came out with huge sustainability goals, GE as well. And so that was super inspiring for me to really see that big companies can really use their power and influence and resources for good. And so that was super exciting for me. And so really my career journey started out as a sustainability consultant and worked with some incredible retail, apparel, and personal care companies. And that's where I would say I cut my chops in sustainability, working on projects around supply chain to reporting, communications. But ultimately, I wanted to make that change to work in-house, particularly in apparel, because, again, at that time, lots of
work to do.
Really great innovation was happening.
Yeah.
Ton of collaboration across the industry on sustainability. And it's been exciting. So like you said, I went to the University of Michigan to get my MBA. And then coming out of there, honestly, the sustainability roles in the apparel and retail space are pretty few and far between, particularly back then. So really focused more on the consumer side of things, right? Because that's what excites me. I want to really help consumers not to have to make a choice about whether they're buying more sustainable or not. I think it would be fantastic that the products that you always buy are just better for the planet. And really thinking about how you can influence entire supply chains and create these consumer movements for good. So had a couple stints at Heineken, and then I worked at the National Hockey League for about 3 years, leading sustainability as well as the social impact programs there. And then ultimately, like I said, it was time for a change, and Smartwool had a job opening. And like I said, apparel was always my goal. So applied for the job, thankfully got it. And have been with VF now for over 4 years. And like I said, I started with Smartwool, but over the past year added on Icebreaker and Altra as well.
Well, fantastic. And we're here to talk about Icebreaker and a couple of threads I want to follow up on that. First of all, you mentioned Walmart. Did you see in the news that they, and we interviewed, or I had the opportunity to interview their head of sustainability earlier in the year, and we were talking about the Gigatron project, and they've already hit the goal. I mean,
I know.
It's right. 5-6 years early. So to your point about, big scale solving with clever people, big problems. I mean, there's proof point number one. You must have been happy about that, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. Incredible. Right. Again, like for a company that size, again, to really use their power and their influence across their entire value chain and hit those goals early. I mean, that's the success we want to keep seeing and hearing about.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's very inspiring for your counterparts and Icebreaker and all your brands as well. And, one of the things I find I just want to talk about you for a couple of seconds. I interview a lot of people in retail, a lot of people in sustainability, and they kind of start to cluster people who get involved in sustainability. Some get involved because it's strategic challenge. It's a very intriguing strategic not to untie in many big companies. Some get involved because it's just such a fascinating operational, because it touches so many things. And others are really passionate about the environment. If you had to describe yourself, you said right away you look for jobs in the sustainability role. Is your approach, listen, I want to solve this problem. I want to get into this because I'm very passionate about sustainability and the environment? Or how would you describe yourself if we had a short elevator ride up to a meeting somewhere? What would be the 30, what would be the 30 second? Here's why I do what I do.
Yeah, I think the impetus is definitely because I care about the environment and want to make sure, that this planet is healthy and that the people on it are healthy. But why I leaned more towards, I guess, working in corporate and the private sector is because of the exciting innovation opportunities, right? Like, yes, if my end goal was to protect the environment, I probably should be working at a nonprofit or in regulation or something like that, right? Because
I think you're onto
you can
something.
have a pretty strong impact there. But I do think, again, like it's exciting to be in industry, because that's really where, again, there's innovation, there is motivation and opportunity to really change the way we consume and operate and just do business across the entire globe. So that's kind of why I ended up in this space, because I think it's just causing us to rethink a little bit about how we operate in the world.
I've talked to counterparts of yours who would sometimes describe it as articulating to companies, your colleagues, and to the world at large that it's a false trade-off. You don't need to have either or in terms of sustainability. You can have great product that is actually good for the environment or not detrimental to the environment. Do you find that dialogue a lot when you're talking to counterparts who don't live and breathe the sustainability file at Icebreaker and the brands?
Yeah, I think, fortunate for me coming to VF, and I will say this, it is the first place that I've worked at where I don't have to necessarily have that conversation.
Oh, okay,
I think the culture at Icebreaker in particular, right, this is a brand that was founded on sustainability, on transparency, on responsibility. And so we've really cultivated that culture over the past almost 30 years now. And so having a brand that attracts the employees that want to work there and know that this is a strong value of the brand. Thankfully, there's that buy-in. And that's what I really appreciate, because as a sustainability professional, it can be very exhausting to continue to, like you said, have to say it's not a trade-off, right? Like good business is sustainable business and vice versa. As I think about it, it doesn't have to be creating this most sustainable product, but even if you're just focusing on getting your forecasting right, right? Not
Right.
overproducing, making sure our
Yeah,
inventory levels are perfect. That is sustainable. And so it's always been great to help
Hmm.
folks within the company across the organization who may not necessarily have sustainability in their title. Most people don't.
Yeah.
But they're thinking about sustainability in a different way. And when it comes to what their job is, how can they reduce their amount of waste that we're producing? How can they reduce the energy? It doesn't have to just live in the materials that we're choosing and the product that we're making. It really is a holistic approach across the brand.
Well, and in the case of Icebreaker, I mean, it's inherently positive, net positive, because it's built to last, right? It's not built for the landfill. So let's talk about Icebreaker. So talk about the brand and you as a retailer. You got stores here in Toronto. I'm in Toronto, Canada. You've got store in Montreal. You got a couple in Vancouver, of course. You got distribution and sporting goods retailer. But tell the listeners all about this, kind of a bit of the scope and scale and what makes Icebreaker as a brand stand out.
Yeah. So like I said, we're coming up on our 30-year anniversary, but Icebreaker was founded in 1995 in New Zealand, really with the mission to eliminate unnecessary plastic from performance material. Our founder had wanted to just create this movement away from synthetic-based apparel and make sure that consumers know, right? Like what that there's an alternative out there, and not just an alternative, that these natural materials really can be a solution to a lot of the problems out there, particularly around sustainability. And so we lean into the amazing benefits of merino wool, right? The breathability, thermoregulation, the sweat wicking properties, to really highlight how this, what we call the wonder fiber, right, can be a fantastic alternative to the synthetic performance apparel out there. And as a brand, we really lean into innovation of natural materials. That is really core, again, to what the brand is about. And as I mentioned before, too, really emphasizing the need for transparency and responsibility in the industry. We just launched a campaign called Keep It Real. We want to make sure that consumers are aware that, hey, some of the products that you may be using are actually made from fossil fuels, right? So I think a huge part of that is educating and trying to create this movement across the apparel industry as a whole. So yeah, as a brand, we were bought by BF Corporate in 2017. And yeah, you can find us globally and in Canada, like you mentioned. We have 7 Touch Labs. That's what we call our brand owned stores.
Touch Labs. Touch Labs. That's fun. Okay.
Yeah. And, I just think in general, the brand really resonates with folks who share similar values with their brand, particularly in Canada, right? A lot of folks are really focused on the betterment of people and planet there. And so we continue to grow and, as I mentioned, really try and champion this movement around natural materials.
Okay. Well, let's get into this objective that you set for yourself. I mean, you've clearly laid out the provenance of the objective of becoming plastic free. And I see this intersection of what you do for a living and a kind of a 30-year journey that started out with this kind of genesis, so to speak, of this plastic free. Now, you set the brand specific goal of becoming plastic free by 2023. How did that come about? It's interesting because I hear the language of sustainability professionals sometimes is ambition to do things versus goals. And I noted from yours, you have a goal, not an ambition. It's an ambitious target, but not an ambition. So talk about the program and how it came about.
Yeah, so this goal was actually set before me. So I've been with the brand for about a year. But the goal for plastic free by 2023 was set in, I think it was 2018. And again, it really came about the fact that we needed to put a stake in the ground around our purpose and values. It's one thing to say, yes, we want to eliminate unnecessary plastic and performance apparel. It's another thing to have our tagline say we want to move to natural. But to say, hey, as a brand, we are fully committed to living out this purpose. We will be plastic free by 23. I think that was huge. And, even though I didn't set that specific goal, I applaud it because I do think, to your point, right, there is a lot of this nuance of we aspire to, we're going to set this ambition. And yes, there's probably legal reasons around how we could talk about goals. But I do think, in the world that we live in right now, where there's that fine line between greenwashing and green hushing, it is really important to set a goal, and it should be ambitious and it should be stretched, because otherwise, why is it a goal? And it's not going to necessarily move the needle. And so the brand president at the time, I think, really pushed this goal. Now, it's also catchy. Plastic Free by 23. It's easy to remember, easy for
I like things that
our
rhyme.
consumers and our stakeholders to really know what we're about.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's been the North Star for our product development team over the past 5 years. And it has really helped us make strategic business decisions, again, to really live out that purpose. We've eliminated some product lines, some that were fairly profitable too, but they used a lot of synthetic, and it just wasn't living up to that brand value. So again, having set that goal, it gave us something that we can stand behind, to show that we would truly believe in this as a brand.
So one of the things that brought us together was your announcement that you didn't hit the goal. So that was interesting to me, that the campaign was about, we missed a goal. And so a couple of questions behind that. I mean, you've kind of articulated this this overall ethos and how it was driving the business. So my business question is, now that you've got to the 23 and didn't hit the goal, what now? But then secondly, why did you go, public with it? And what did you think you'd achieve by coming out and saying, listen, we set a goal and we didn't achieve it? Talk about the thinking behind that.
Yeah. So, right. It's 2024 now. In 2023, we're at 96.14% plastic.
Close.
Yeah, so close. And again, the journey doesn't end there for us. We know that ultimately moving towards 100% is the ultimate goal. And our product development team continues to focus. Sorry?
Is the last 3.5% the hardest part, though? I know it's not all proportion. The first 50% we got there over, I'm making things up, but the first 50% was easy. The next 25% was a little harder. The last few percentage, I bet they're really hard, right?
It's really hard. Yes, Michael. The majority of it is the elastane that we use in our socks and our underwear. And there's also, some nylon in our socks as well. And so finding those alternatives right now, it's neither not scalable, it's too expensive, or the alternative just isn't there in terms of performance. And so our material innovation team is really focused on continuing to test and find those alternatives. But to your point, it's really hard, and it may honestly take another 5 years to maybe find the right substitute for it.
You might have to invent it yourselves, right? I mean, I talked to brands, said, listen, nobody's working on this. We're just going to make it. We're just going to invent it ourselves, or figure it out somehow.
Yeah,
some way.
Who knows? Definitely, we find the right partner to invest in and find that. I think that could be, again, a really great direction for Icebreaker to find that solution and push again. Right, we want to put a challenge out, potentially to the industry. Like, hey, let's continue to find these solutions.
Well, if you can hear anyone listening can hear the sound of our voice, there you go. There's your opportunity and challenge. Get this big global brand across the finish line. Reach out. We'll put the contact information in. Hey, listen, on a go forward basis, I want to talk about your role in the organization, and everyone is very concerned, and I whether it's you're in charge of particular files, you're the customer advocate, that it sometimes can be the case that it's tempting to be, okay, somebody else is doing that. I mean, you mentioned it, it's not necessarily my objective to worry about sustainability, because now we've got a leader who's focused on that, so I don't have to focus on that, which is not the outcome I think you want to foster the culture that the organization is looking for. But tell me about how you avoid that, I don't know, what do we call that, perception trap, and how you lead, and how the sustainability file continues to lead it at Icebreaker and VF.
So I am a one-woman team. So to your point, right, I can't do it alone, and I shouldn't. And as I mentioned before, right, coming to Icebreaker, I'm very fortunate that there is full buy-in from the top, and that, again, over the past 30 years, we've created this beautiful culture that really revolves around sustainability. Again, because this is what the brand is known for. So we attract, many folks who share these values and want to know that. And ultimately, again, having limited resources, I have to rely on, the different teams, the product team, the operations team, marketing. And it's been a really great collaboration. And oftentimes, to your point, like I always joke that honestly, if I could work myself out of a job, that would be ideal in some way, right? Because that means that it's truly embedded in the work that everyone does. Again, I would say really having, again, the buy-in from the top helps make sure that I'm not doing it alone, that people know that, okay, it's not just going to fall on Alicia, but then also building up that foundation and culture from the bottom up as well. Right. So you have not only coming from the top, the leaders saying, hey, sustainability is important. Everyone needs to do this. But then also having folks who want to work on this, who come to me with ideas around how they can integrate sustainability into their role. Because I don't see everything, right? Or I don't have visibility into every.
I don't know. I don't know how many hours you're working.
So I have to really depend on these folks to bubble up, the solutions or the problems as well.
Let's your background is in you've got a very strong background in strategy as well as sustainability. So let's talk strategy and comms for a little bit. So, how do we think about 2024, 2025? I mean, we see emerging business models in retail that are clearly not focused on sustainability. The China direct model is, as I call it, the landfill direct model, is clearly not focused on sustainability, yet it's clearly very popular with consumers in the short term. I understand your brand and a brand like Icebreaker would make its differentiation point. Its sustainability element is a key element of the brand value proposition. What do you see moving forward? How do you see this conversation today and tomorrow amongst consumer and retail?
Yep. It's funny. I think a lot of us in the industry, we joke like we really want to believe and buy into all the data that's telling us that consumer trends tell us, the younger generation cares about sustainability. They're buying with their values. But then to your point, right, you see the rise of super fast fashion. But there's also the backlash against that. You do see that. There was like a Business Vogue article, I believe, on TikTok, and how there's a huge movement against just overconsumption, which is fantastic because that's exactly the conversation that needs to happen. We see the growth of resale, right? I know, again, Gen Z, there's a lot of folks who won't buy new. They want to buy, sustainably. So to me, I choose to believe that, right? That we're seeing those trends and that consumers do want to buy more sustainably. But ultimately, what we as a brand need to do is really just lean into the values of the product, right? We can't rely on the fact that, yes, we can tell this gorgeous story about natural materials and why it is better for the planet and people. And that may appeal to some, but I think the vast majority of consumers will be like, great, that's cool. I'm glad that this is a brand that aligns to my values. But at the end of the day, is that product going to actually meet my needs? And so that's for us where we have to talk about durability, talk about, again, all the beautiful benefits that merino wool can provide to the consumer. And then say, yes, and it is more sustainable.
Yes, and
but I think
love
it's interesting, too, because particularly in our space, sustainability is going to become more of a regulatory need for our business. We already see all the legislation coming out of the EU. There's more, legislation that potentially will happen in New York and California here in the U.S.
Yep.
In Canada, I know there's, packaging regulation as well. And so there's going to be this mix, I'd say, of one, we're going to need to care about sustainability and start to reduce our impact and have the data to report. That's just going to be table stakes at this point, making sure that we actually are taking responsibility for our product and the end of life. We're going to see more of that as well. But ultimately, it is still important from a consumer standpoint particularly for the outdoor consumer. I think that's also where, with Icebreaker and the other brands that I work on, it's very easy and more compelling to tell the stories as a consumer. But how do we play a role in influencing their behavior, right? I think that's a really interesting space for our brands to start leaning into. How do we get them to think more about the longevity of a product and the opportunity to repair and resale, and how do we help them be more sustainable in their choices? So that's what I'm excited for. I do think the regulation is important and necessary to push a lot of this change, but I think ultimately there's an exciting opportunity for our brands to really change the conversation with the consumer as well.
Last question for you, advice for the listeners, the retailers listening, and I frame it in 2 starts and 1 stop. 2 things they should start thinking about or doing, and 1 thing that they should stop. Maybe it's not working anymore. Maybe you see it as a common, I don't know, like myth or something. Any thoughts and advice for the listeners?
Continue to start to understand the consumer. Like I said, for some brands, for some retailers, they may not care about sustainability, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, like I said, good business is sustainable business. So again, really thinking through what is your perspective on sustainability and what makes sense for your company, I think is really important. Again, we know our consumer cares about sustainability, and that's why we're leaning into, again, our values and what we're doing. But if your consumer doesn't, that's okay. But there's a lot of value that can be seen from being environmentally and sustainably minded. Again, just starting to educate yourself internally as well as your stakeholders. I think there's a lot of ways for us to collaborate across the industry. That's huge, particularly around sustainability initiatives. How can we find scalable solutions? How can we kind of get over ourselves and, the competition and really come together for good? That's my hope. I'm all about collective action, and really, again, hope we can start to lean in with each other to solve a lot of these problems that we're facing. And then stop. Maybe that kind of ties into the other one. Like, let's get out of our own way. And again, really work to showcase the benefits that sustainability, community engagement, responsibility can have for our businesses and people on the planet.
Well, fantastic. Now, what's a best way to get in touch with you? Are you a LinkedIn person to kind of keep that collaboration going and learn more about what Icebreaker and VF is out for on this file? What's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, LinkedIn. Please reach out. I'm always pretty active on there, so that's probably the best way to reach me.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. It was really great to meet you and hear what's going on at Icebreaker. And I want to congratulate you on ambitious goals and pointed in the right direction. It's a great job in a great organization. So continued success. And I'm wishing you a great rest of the year. And let's touch base again next year and see how the goal is progressing. So once again, thanks for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.